The story I'm about to tell happened over 25 years ago. And the reason I'm sharing it is because I feel like the case has been completely forgotten, and because I need to warn people to never let their guard down. Pay attention to your friend groups, to the people close to you, and most importantly, never ignore it when your gut tells you something is wrong. At the time, the case was all over the media, and I don't want to go through that again. For the sake of this account, I won't mention exact locations or use the real names of the people involved. However, everything else happened exactly as I'm about to describe. I've always had some difficulty making friends. I was a shy girl, and many people mistook my shyness for rudeness. When I started college, I met Leah, one of the funniest, most outgoing girls I had ever known. We became good friends, and little by little, I became part of her friend group, a group she had known since freshman year. The idea of belonging to a group like that was something I had only dreamed of, so when the opportunity came, I grabbed onto it with everything I had. The group was amazing, and I loved everyone. But there was one guy, let's call him Robert, who always made me uncomfortable. He had never done anything to me, but something about him gave me chills, and not in a good way. The summer after our sophomore year of college, the group planned to spend a week in a cabin in the Great Smoky Mountains and hike part of the Appalachian Trail in that area. I had never been very adventurous, and I don't remember ever having gone hiking or camping before that summer, but I didn't hesitate to say yes. The trip to the cabin is one of my best memories. Everyone had fun on the drive there, and even the hike to the cabin, though exhausting, was fantastic. I remember thinking Robert seemed particularly excited, more than I had ever seen him before, and I started to wonder if I had misjudged him. The week was planned down to the smallest detail. Michael, one of the guys in the group, loved making plans and lists, so he took care of everything for us. The idea was to hike several trails, and on the third day, tackle one of the biggest ones in the area. That hike would require spending the night outdoors in tents to reach a specific part of the trail. I had never camped before, and the idea seemed exciting to me. However, by the second day, I started feeling the first symptoms of something. I had a slight fever, or at least I thought I did, but no one had brought a thermometer. So, as a group, we decided I would stay at the cabin while the others went on the hike. Leah protested, saying it didn't make sense for me to stay alone, but I didn't want them to miss out because of me. Besides, if I was really sick, it was better for them not to stay with me and risk getting sick too. That's when Robert said not to worry because he would stay behind as well. He explained that he wasn't feeling great and didn't want to slow them down. The way he said it, and the smile he gave me right after made my stomach clench. Something felt off. Maybe his eyes, maybe his smile, maybe just an innate instinct of danger. But I ignored that feeling, smiled back, and let it go. I didn't want to ruin the mood, and I had no proof that anything was wrong. The next morning, the others left. Leah came to my room, gave me a tight hug, and asked if I was sure I'd be okay. Later, I found out that she too had felt uncomfortable around him. I told her yes, not to worry, and forced my best smile. The day went fine. There were awkward moments of silence between me and Robert, but nothing that truly alarmed me. When night fell and I started feeling a little worse, I decided to go to bed. He smiled at me, that same eerie smile, and wished me good night. Since we arrived, I had never locked my bedroom door, but that night, instinct took over. Without a second thought, I closed and locked it as a precaution. I woke up around 2:30 a.m. to a soft knock on the door. It was Robert. Casually, he asked if I could give him a painkiller for his headache. I told him Leah had left a first aid kit in the kitchen. There was a brief silence on the other side, almost imperceptible, but it sent a shiver down my spine. Then, he thanked me and walked away. Not even 30 minutes later, he knocked again. He said what he took hadn't worked and asked for another pill. That didn't make sense. He knew he couldn't take 2 different medications in such a short time. I explained that to him, and once again, there was silence from the other side of the door. He was clearly trying to get me to open it one way or another. Then, in an extremely aggressive tone, he demanded that I open the door and give him the pill. At that moment, I knew something was very wrong. He was desperate to get me to open the door, and I knew that if he really wanted to, he could break it down. That's when I made the decision that probably saved my life. I couldn't call the police in the middle of nowhere without a clear reason. I had to get out of there. I grabbed a jacket, threw the essentials into a backpack, silently opened the window, and jumped out. Then, I ran through the forest until I couldn't anymore. Luckily, I eventually found a small depression between some rocks, where I spent the rest of the night. It was one of the scariest moments of my life. The sounds of the forest made me paranoid. I didn't know if he had followed me or if something else would come out of nowhere. Thankfully, daylight came, and I kept walking in what I thought was the opposite direction of the cabin. I knew my friends were coming back that day, and that when Leah realized I was missing, she would call the police. I spent 2 days in the Smoky Mountains, terrified and practically without food. But at the end of the second day, I was found by a rescue team. I spent 2 days in the hospital undergoing tests and getting rehydrated. They discovered I had food poisoning, but they never figured out the cause. When the police came to speak with me, I felt my blood run cold. Robert had disappeared. But the worst part was what my friends had found when they returned to the cabin. The living room area, the one with the TV, sofas, and fireplace, was completely covered in plastic. For 22 days, those mountains were searched extensively by the police, but there was never a trace of him again. He probably managed to leave the country. Eventually, I moved to another state and rebuilt my life. Over time, I lost contact with everyone from that group, even Leah. Even though I'm okay, I was never able to camp or hike again, and I'm wary of most people who come into my life. My goal in telling this story is to warn you. Instinct exists for a reason. We often ignore it to avoid upsetting others. But if I learned anything from this experience, it's that it's always better to be safe than sorry. Hey, Horror Spectator here. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on post notifications so you're always in the loop when new videos drop. We post 2 videos every week. If you're really into this content, consider sharing it with your friends. It really helps us grow this community. Now, let's move on to the second story. In 1983, I was 22 years old, fresh out of college, and completely lost. I had my degree, but I had no clue what I wanted to do with my life. I figured a solo backpacking trip through nature might give me some clarity. I was an experienced backpacker, and I mapped out a 43-mile hike along the Appalachian Trail, starting in South Carolina. The plan was to spend 7 days alone and then meet a friend at a designated spot. They would bring resupplies, and we'd finish the hike together. When I told my parents, they weren't worried. I had done trips like this before, and they trusted my skills. So on November 18th, I set off. The first couple of days were incredible. The weather was perfect, the scenery was breathtaking, and I had plenty of time to reflect. But on the third morning, something changed. I woke up in my tent with a deep, unshakable sense of something. It wasn't logical. I had everything I needed, I hadn't forgotten anything, and yet I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I think it's important to say that I'm nothing like that guy who always knows how to identify danger and when to act. In fact, even though I grew up in these mountains and have a great sense of direction, I've never been good at recognizing dangerous situations. So having that feeling was completely strange to me. I was still inside the tent when I suddenly remembered what I had dreamed during the night. Or at least what I thought had been a dream. I was inside that same tent. It was nighttime, and I had heard some kind of noise. Something kind of bizarre. I pushed that feeling aside, got up, and stepped out of the tent. Then I packed up my campsite and got ready to move. As I scanned the tree line, just casually, not expecting to see anything, I thought I saw a man standing behind a tree about 50 or 60 feet away. I did a double take, but when I looked again, he was gone. I stood there, staring at the spot where I had seen him, wondering if my mind was playing tricks on me. If someone had been there, why wouldn't they show themselves again? Out here, hikers usually greeted each other, especially in such a remote area. A growing unease settled over me. I wasn't ready to call out. It felt too strange. Instead, I hurriedly packed up my gear and started down the trail, putting as much distance as I could between me and that spot. As I walked, the eerie sensation of being watched wouldn't go away. Every few minutes, I turned around, convinced someone was behind me, but I never saw anyone. Still, the feeling lingered. It got so intense that I started walking faster. Then I was jogging. Then I was running. I knew I was deep in the wilderness, miles from civilization. I had two choices: keep following the trail for hours, possibly into the night, or take a shortcut. I was pretty sure a road ran parallel to the trail, further down the mountain. It would mean cutting through the dense forest. But if I was right, I could get out of there faster. My gut told me I had to leave the trail, so I veered off the trail and started running down the mountainside. It wasn't long before I heard it. Footsteps. Distant, but deliberate. I stopped, listening hard, and there it was again. A crunch of leaves, a snapped twig. Every time I turned, nothing was there. I'm not the smallest guy in my family or friend group. Actually, I've got the kind of build that would make someone think twice before messing with me. But honestly, it's all just for show. I've never had to fight for my life. And the one time I got into a fight in school, I got my ass kicked. I'm just not the kind of guy who feels comfortable getting into a fight, even in a situation like that. And then came the noises. Low, guttural sounds, almost like grunts or murmurs, but not quite words. It was a deep voice, but unnatural. My heart was pounding, my body on high alert. I pushed forward as fast as I could, convinced that whatever was following me was getting closer. As night fell, I still hadn't reached the road. I had no choice but to set up camp in the middle of nowhere. I was terrified. I crawled into my tent, zipped it up tight, and prayed that nothing would come near me. But the moment I lay down, I heard it again. Heavy footsteps circling my campsite. Slow, deliberate. I held my breath, barely moving. Whoever, or whatever, it was never came right up to my tent, but it stayed close. I barely slept. At first light, I packed up and ran, but the feeling of being watched never left. The footsteps, the noises, the lurking presence. It was always just beyond my line of sight. I told myself I had to keep moving, but by the second night, I was still lost. I hadn't found the road. I couldn't backtrack, and I knew I was in serious danger. That night, the sounds returned. The heavy footsteps, the deep, unintelligible voice. I gripped my knife, knowing it wouldn't do much against whatever was out there. By the third day, I was exhausted and out of options. So I made a desperate decision. I ditched my backpack, my tent, sleeping bag, food, and water. Everything I needed to survive. It was dead weight, and I needed to be able to run faster. I ran until my body gave out. I realized that people might find this decision strange, but the truth is, at the time, I was completely desperate, being stalked, and I was absolutely sure that sooner or later, I would find the road. The backpack I was carrying was slowing me down and draining my last bit of energy. I don't know if it was the best decision or not, but it was the only one I could make at that moment. I was found 3 days after ditching my backpack, 6 days after it all began. I barely remember anything, and most of it is a complete blur. The one thing I do remember is leaving my backpack behind and taking off running. But the farther I ran, the more everything faded, like I was slipping in and out of reality. A hunter discovered me slumped against a tree, delirious, dehydrated, and barely clinging to consciousness. At first, I thought he was my stalker, and I panicked. But when I realized he was there to help, I broke down. When I was finally safe in a hospital, I told the authorities everything I could. Some thought I had suffered a mental breakdown, that my fear had made me imagine the whole thing. But others, including local park rangers, believed me. There are other reports, some from park rangers themselves, claiming they were stalked in the same area. To this day, I don't know what was out there with me. No one ever found any evidence of who or what had been following me. All I know is that I wasn't alone in those woods,